Hey everyone, I'm Matt and welcome to the Good Trouble Show, coming to you live from a hotel room at an undisclosed location. Today we have journalist Chris Sharp and attorney JP Hague to discuss how corruption in the United States Congress won over democracy regarding UAP transparency. But first, do us a solid and hit that subscribe and thumbs up button on YouTube. You can also find us on Twitter at Good Trouble Show and all other social media platforms at The Good Trouble Show. We have links to all of our social media accounts in the YouTube description. Do us a favor, leave a comment, share, like, and subscribe. All of those things encourage these platforms to spread the word about our show to the masses that do not track the UFO subject, which is obviously a pretty large population. You can also find us on all of your podcasting platforms, your favorite ones. Just search for The Good Trouble Show. We also need your help keeping the lights on. You can become a supporter of The Good Trouble Show by going to www.patreon.com/The Good Trouble Show. And for the price of a Starbucks, you can help us support our work. And then finally on YouTube, we were going to have our super chats open and take questions, but we weren't able to schedule any mods today. So we will not be doing that. Next time we promise to do so. Anyway, so the UAP Disclosure Act of 2023, authored by Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer and co-sponsored, I'm tongue-tied this morning, by Republican Senator Mike Rounds, would have established groundbreaking federal law regarding government transparency and accountability on the UAP topic. Unfortunately, in a victory for corruption, Republican Mike Turner, and I've some nicknames for him I won't mention, gutted the major provisions of the bill. Today, Christopher Sharp, actually it was yesterday, we were going to be on yesterday, but we're on today. So yesterday, Christopher Sharp of the Liberation Times released an op-ed, Operation Kill Bill. Let's see, I'm going to bring a copy of this thing up here. Operation Kill Bill, how world-changing UFO language was killed and sliced up into little pieces. Joining us today on what went down on Capitol Hill, we have here with us, bring it up, we have on the center here, attorney JP Hague, who's first time being on our show, and of course, Christopher Sharp, who's been a longtime guest on our show. Guys, welcome. How are you feeling about this?
Oh, good evening, Matt. Thanks so much for having me on. I'm a fan of your show and the work that you do, and of course, our dear friend Chris here, who works tirelessly whilst maintaining all manner of other things going on in his life. So thanks, and well done to you both. How do I feel about what's happened? It's within expectations. I think it's disappointing for sure, because there was a monumental effort that went into rallying and preparing this bill, which was extremely comprehensive, well thought out in the main. But there seemed to be a lack of support from it on the Democrat side, as well as obviously a highly motivated small group of Republican representatives that effectively killed the bill, as Chris's article says. So disappointing from my perspective, but not unexpected.
Chris, how about yourself? What I think probably everyone was disappointed. I would imagine I could count you as one of those folks as well.
Absolutely. And yeah, I just want to welcome JP, another home county's brother from England here. So
nice.
He's someone who has dedicated himself to the topic, and he is definitely going in my history book when I get to write about this in years to come, because he has certainly paid his part. Yes, so it was killed. all the most meaningful parts of the language totally gutted. Like, there's not really much you can pull out of it, really. I mean, some people can say, oh yeah, we've got limitations of funds, but like, that's to do with like UAP, unidentified anomalous phenomena, as referenced in the NDA 2023. And if you look at the definition of UAP, in terms of the NDAA 2023, there's no reference to non-human origin or unknown origin, and I think that's the biggest myth of them all, that UAP means non-human intelligence. It doesn't. It just means something that's not immediately identifiable as per the language within the NDAA 2023. So if you're referencing that and you're not referencing kind of like any programs relating to non-human materials and materials of unknown origin that are exotic, then there's so much wriggle room for these contractors. It's unreal. So there is no meaning in this language whatsoever from where I'm sitting.
So Chris, going back to, speaking of the language, going back to what this legislation would have done, walk us through what it could have accomplished had the whole thing been approved.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. So, I mean, what it would have accomplished, it would have accomplished a independent review board serving at the pleasure of the president, being appointed by the president. So it would have escalated this issue to the White House explicitly. So that's a really, really big coup. And, this board would have been independent and hopefully made of trustworthy individuals that would be able to trust in actually releasing this information in terms of the records, in terms of UAP. It would have also contained eminent domain language as well, which is very, very important. I mean, I think JP might be able to go through the specifics because obviously this was uniquely tied to kind of like non-human and unknown biologics and materials. But from my understanding, the government can kind of like take this kind of action regardless of it. But obviously this is directly pointed at such programs. So from my understanding, there was a lot of resistance to this language. But yeah, I mean, it would have meant a great deal to get this language through, but unfortunately, many of the most meaningful aspects have been completely destroyed. It would have also had new whistleblower and witness protections within the language as well, gone. Enforcement of subpoena, gone. Amnesty provision for defense contractors and other entities in possession of UAP related materials, gone. Yeah. So I'm
Very
trying
sad.
I'm trying to smile right now, but
That's kind of hard, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Let's talk about the eminent domain clause. I one particular senator's office that I've worked with for quite some time. I said to them very early on that I thought the eminent domain clause would be an issue, and it would have been better in my opinion. And of course, this is just my personal opinion. I don't do this for a living, but that should have been removed to protect the rest of the legislation, whose elements, as you just mentioned, were really quite substantial. JP, walk us through, because one of the things, I consider myself a liberal capitalist. There's nothing wrong with making money, in my view, responsibly, that is. But to me, it felt as if the eminent domain clause, JP, from a legal perspective, could have really been a slippery slope that would have applied to other areas not even related to UAP. From a legal perspective, JP, what are your thoughts on that provision that obviously did not go through? And what are your thoughts on that eminent domain clause? And do you think that could have been one of the major elements that tanked it?
Yeah, that's right, Matt. I think it's one of the tipping points to the failure of this piece of ambitious draft legislation. I mean, what are we talking about? It's a government appropriation and control over recovered technologies of unknown origin, potentially biological evidence of non-human intelligences or intelligence under private control. So it's a serious business. I think that overall, as I mentioned in the introduction, the themes of the Schumer Amendment, or the Disclosure Act as it was called, were thorough. They were well thought out. But there were particularly several claims of government overreach, and there was a Spartan kind of catch-all in the drafting of this eminent domain clause, which I've looked at several times, which basically took out the net over all recovered materials of unknown origin, regardless as to whose hands they're actually in, and. That I'm British, like Chris, as you can tell by the accent, but giveaway. But it is controversial, especially in such a modern nation and a superpower nation that really inherits and values private property rights, and particularly against this backdrop of a completely unclear to us and complex hidden history that appears to have taken place with the national security state, which is what we're seeing from the body of legislation and draft legislation that we're talking about today, based on witness testimony, of course, and it's compelling. Now, as you're right, you mentioned that while we had this draft eminent domain clause in the Schumer amendment, apparently this is actually an inherent constitutional right under the Fifth Amendment. So it's always been there. It's always been sat in, the background. And the Constitution is the pinnacle of this legal hierarchy of norms that is the Constitution of the United States of America. So we shouldn't forget that. And I guess what it did is it just sort of put out that statement of intent from the sponsors of the bill to say that we're actually going to invoke this in this specific context. But one of the major concerns that the community that I speak to brought out was that it would potentially have a chill on bona fide research for private citizens who had discovered materials or even, let's say, biological matter potentially. I mean, I don't know how likely or unlikely that is, but
nothing would surprise me these days.
It is a science fiction stroke science fact reality that we're addressing. Right. It really is, and it's incredible. And this is the real issue behind all of this, is that there are major philosophical and existential questions behind it, which is why the body of military and political professionals behind this felt that, well, there's more, in the public interest and in the public good, and they use the term "in the public good" in the draft legislation. But I do think that, had this carried through, it would have been better to clarify and tweak the clause, but also to have secondary or subordinate legislation, which would have been useful here to kind of qualify the application and distinguish, say, perhaps between aerospace contractors and ordinary private citizens that have found what they suspect to be exotic materials or of a non-human origin for study. And if I was them, I would want to get the materials outside of the United States just to see if we could look at them and get some scientific analysis. I think that there was also another issue with this sort of very broad catch-all drafting, is that by doing that, you're inviting very highly skilled and highly paid lawyers acting on behalf of the contractor world to go into semantics and to pick apart the text. And one that I picked up on, for example, was that there was a sort of contradiction in the drafting that assumed the status of materials of unknown origin or biological matter connected to UAP or UAPs, and that this was applied and that they would be given up. But at the same time, you have or had this powerful review board of 9, which was effectively a board that would admit, disclose through the president and other institutions within the democratic machinery of the states to decide whether they would release these records or documents that show this. And they would have to decide at the same time whether these materials are beyond all reasonable doubt, which is a high bar for the criminal standard of proof. So it was unclear, and I think they could have been picked apart by the contractor world had it been put out in the format of that clause. And you'd have also probably owners of, say, private individual owners of materials that they found on their property, on their land, or been given by somebody else. And they would probably argue, well, if it's down to you, the review board, or the agent authority to identify it, you need to tell me. You need to identify me or the materials, make a specific demand for these specific materials, or any records to be given up. So it invites that kind of game, And I think one other thing that could have been done, instead of invoking this broad brush catch-all net, is to say have a system of notifications where instead you're actually putting the onus or the burden on private individuals or entities, companies, to notify the government. And there's also a distinction to be made between aerospace contractor recovered materials and those that have been done at their expense versus what the United States government have paid for, and how that's been assumedly shared between the two, the private contractor world and the United States government. And how does that get resolved when you have eminent domain? And then I think that invites the question as to whether there should be a sharing of intellectual property rights if it's in the case of an aerospace contractor that's actually done the groundwork, recovered the materials, or engineered or reversed them at its own expense. So I think there's all these very complex questions that get to the heart of democracy, but that have a really pragmatic way of playing out. So that's my kind of summary of eminent domain. I don't think that was the only reason that this bill failed, because the whole thing was a powerhouse of intent. And I can't remember who said it, but you can't really get a little bit pregnant. You know a little bit to know to know the whole.
Right.
So
sure. Right. Yeah. And it totally makes sense. And again, I'm not going to come from a place of defending aerospace contractors, but I think you brought up a good point, which I had never thought of. It had never crossed my mind. But let's take, for instance, Brandon Fugel and Skinwalker Ranch. So Brandon bought this ranch. He clearly has invested a lot of his time and money to research all of this. We haven't seen any of this research become public. I hope he does that at some point. But if I were Brandon and I owned this ranch, and the government were to, and let's say I found some material made by non-human hands, and then the government comes in and says, "Oops, sorry, Brandon, that's mine." If I were Brandon, I would be pretty upset. And also too, I think it is a fair question. So, for instance, Jay Stratton at Radiance, I would love to know what his thoughts are or were on the legislation regarding eminent domain. So he's at Radiance Technologies. I have no idea if they have any materials, but if they did, how, and again, being I would say liberal capitalist, how can you justify the government coming in and just blanket saying, "Oops, that's ours"? So I would personally be interested to know the two of them, what their thoughts were on the eminent domain thing. It always kind of rubbed me in a weird way. So Chris, what did you hear in terms of going back to the defense contractors? I know in past articles, your sources have told you that Lockheed Martin wanted to divest themselves of craft, that they felt it was overclassified, they weren't getting anywhere. But now, of course, we hear that people like Lockheed and perhaps others such as Radiance and I'm sure other private contractors that we have, and of course, no confirmation of any of this. What have you heard since then? Did Lockheed change their tune? Was it an internal struggle and the group that thought we need to hold on to this stuff won out? What are you hearing?
Absolutely. So first I would say that Travis, Jay Stratton and Brandon Fugel, I mean they're friends of Liberation Times, let's say, and they've done so much for the cause. I know there's a lot of talk going on about them right now, but that there's no evidence. These are all just claims. And I just want to put it out there that, they're people that I look up to, and they're very, very important for the community. But saying that, yes, I mean, there are questions that you do want to ask, such as, if Lockheed did want to divest itself of this technology, have they now found themselves a partner, let's say, or a customer? is maybe a better word. So, I mean, there are some questions to be had. In terms of the eminent domain language, I would state that there were some ideas that were being brought up in terms of creating like a new kind of like entity created by the government in which private contractors and the government could like work together on this technology, and then to get around the potential lawsuits bringing outside contractors that never got access to these materials. I mean, that's been brought up before. That might be a pragmatic solution to this. I mean, JP might have some thoughts around that. But yeah, I mean, there are lots of questions right now, and this is the current phase I'm going through with my journalism. You know, there are a lot of questions at play here to be answered now, and now we're just searching for some of the answers to do with those. We do know that Lockheed Martin has provided substantial amounts of money to the likes of Representative Rogers and Representative Turner in the past, and they wield a lot of power. And we also found out as well that Morley Green, an ex-staffer from Representative Turner's office, is now a director for basically the lobbying branch of Lockheed Martin, which I found interesting. So look, we have all these like disjoint pieces right now to kind of like suggest that there may be some influence at play here, but we have no direct evidence yet. All we have is questions.
Yeah, I mean, I think like anything, money makes the world go around, and yeah, it's a sticky wicket, and I'm sure folks like Lockheed and others were worried that if this passed, how would it affect other programs of theirs where maybe they have materials that were on loan to them or whatever. So stuff not even related to the UAP issue per se. And again, I'm not sticking up for them, but I do think it is a fair question all of us should ask, if anything, for what the future legislation should have. So maybe this was kind of the trial balloon that was floated, and it would sort of knowing what the pushback was and where the issues were, that would better inform the people that would write future legislation on how to craft something down the road that would not get defeated. Now, JP, Chris brought this up a second ago. There's been a lot of talk in the past about lack of a fair bidding in terms of these reverse engineering programs. So let's say something is recovered and it's boom, just automatically given to Lockheed Martin. Now, I do understand within the United States government, there can be, I think it's called sole source bidding, or a sole source contract where it's not given out, where other contractors are not allowed the opportunity to bid on something. And I understand you may not be as familiar with American business law, but any thoughts on that? Because that is something that's kind of over my head. Is that applicable in this case? And would it be a legal sort of Pandora's box if all of a sudden Congress or other businesses, let's say Boeing, were able to go and sue Lockheed for getting something that they should have had fair access to?
Yeah, I mean, now we're in the realm of speculation, but I think it's fair to say that you're basically trying to shine a light under inside a very dark space. And, let's be honest, this is potentially, or is, the greatest secret on Earth. And I don't think that, the light of procurement laws and bidding and so on has any relevance in essence, in truth. Maybe if there is a process at play that is some requirement that's required under certain restricted access or special access programs, fine. But it's a network. It's a very, very limited pool of highly skilled, highly resourced businesses that have a civil aviation or civil front. And then obviously there's this more exotic side, which is being extremely well hidden in the interests of the national security state. And I think within that kind of community, it's a bit like the legal community. Everything is kind kind of compartmentalized, and that, you know, you go to this lawyer who's a specialist in M&A, mergers and acquisitions, you go to this person or group for competition law. And I think it depends on what we're looking at, which applications, what kind of reverse engineering. You know, maybe Boeing or Lockheed Martin deal with a tic-tac reverse engineering program, who knows? But I think they sort of know where to go and who to go to amongst themselves. And the question is as to how much real oversight there really is. And maybe that serves the US government's interests in order to, you know, disclaim any kind of responsibility and real knowledge of this, because it's just too much. And I think what we need to also remember is this isn't, we're dealing with non-human intelligences. We're dealing with existential questions and science that goes beyond, you know, our understanding within the public sphere. And I just think that we have to start to think differently, and, you know, applying how you know, human society goes about things and democracy is meant to go about things. The Schumer amendment was a good effort, but there's so many problems with what's happened. I mean, we know that everything has been whittled down, but even, you know, down to the definition of unidentified anomalous phenomena, you know, basic definition, and it's kind of been reverted back to what was under the NDAA of 2022. And it's not a bad go, but it's nothing compared to the broadness of the specification within the definition of UAP under the Schumer amendment, which takes into account the so-called 5 observables, which was basically coined under the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program, or ATIP, which was spearheaded by none other than Lou Elizondo and then Jay Stratton, and then used within the community. And it just captures what it is that we are trying to funnel up into the democratic machinery to some extent. And I just think that the definition that they've reverted back to is just too general. And you're looking at potential, you know, air trash or space trash, and it's a real lost opportunity. And for me, it just seems like a complete whitewash. It was a total kill switch effort. It wasn't just eminent domain. And because I think that these things they're very hard to, you know, stop the slippery slope from occurring once you hold on to certain details. They say the devil is in the detail, and I think it can expose a whole myriad of secrets that not only would compromise the activities of the contractor world, but, you know, potentially create issues for civil, well, what's the word? Order. And, you know, what is really in the public interest here? That's that. And from a governmental point of view, which is to maintain stability, there is no interest for a government to really do this unless there are really important questions at stake. So for me, I think that, you know, in terms of bidding and procurement, it's such a peripheral issue to the essence of what's actually going on. And, you know, I think we're a very long way from ever getting close to something like that. And again, I need to emphasize, what are the NHIs, the non-human intelligences themselves, up to? You know, what impact do they have in human affairs and government affairs that we literally have no idea about at all? And maybe even, you know, the contractors and government have no real control over this. And that could be the biggest secret, actually.
Yeah, for sure. Chris, what if, here's one idea that came to mind. If they were to redo this legislation, present it again next year, which personally I'm skeptical that Schumer would do that if he's still the majority leader. I feel like he's already spent his political capital. But do you think if that same legislation were tightened up, but the eminent domain clause were completely removed, so there's no potential financial or legal blowback on contractors, do you think that the legislation as it was currently written, but minus the eminent domain clause, if that were to be put back up for the 2024 NDAA, do you think it would have a chance of passing? Or, touching back on what JP said, that there really were other issues?
Absolutely. If it was just the eminent domain clause that was the issue here, then all the other language would have remained. apart from the eminent domain language, because they would have had no problem with those ones. But whoever's put Turner up to this had a problem with large chunks of the language. All the language that was meaningful was literally just, sorry, probably the wrong term to use, but it was just all taken out. It was all removed. Okay, there is nothing left to feast on. They do not want any of this language out. Okay, and if something was proposed for fiscal year 2025, that could potentially mean a Trump president basically going about it and being tasked with presenting this data. So I think in a way, if it does turn out that Trump does win the next election, we miss a real key opportunity here for, you know, a democratic kind of like Biden transparency disclosure effort. If there was a time frame for President Biden to become like the disclosure / confirmation president, this was the key moment. Regardless, we don't know who's going to win next year in the election, but I don't know. Looking at polling at the moment, it does seem that it might be a 50-50 between a potential Trump or a Biden presidency. And once we get into a potential Trump presidency, then I just don't know anymore. Everything's kind of off the cards. We have, all bets are off, because we've already had the former director of national intelligence, John Radcliffe, basically state that they were trying to release all the UFO information out before Trump was, gone from office. So you just don't know what direction it's going to take. And I would also point out as well that there seems to be some kind of schism within the Republican Party. You had the likes of Representative Luna and Gates coming out for disclosure and for this language to pass, whereas kind of like your more kind of established country club Republicans, such as Representatives Rogers and Turner and Johnson as well, and McConnell and Wicker, you know, those are the ones from sources saying that they oppose this. So yeah, we're kind of like in unknown territory now. It should be a wild ride, I'm guessing.
I would agree. And again, I'm sure this isn't something that would be easily confirmed, but were there any specifics, Chris, that any of your sources told you about who in particular was doing the most, I'll just say, dirty work to derail this, with Turner or whatever? And were there any specifics as far as who you heard they were speaking with or lobbying? Is there anything that you could add to that?
So sources told me that Representative Turner and Rogers were the key members here that were being lobbied. Obviously, you've got Turner, who's the chair of the Intel Committee, and you've got Rogers, who's the chair of the Armed Services Committee. And I'd also mention one thing, you know, there are a lot of failed journalists out there who are going to be, you know, saying lots of stuff about Liberation Times, because look, mainstream journalism, traditional journalism, they failed in providing accountability for these, for the DoD and for a lot of the representatives. You know, you look at some of the publications reporting on the UAP issue. You know, I've seen public affairs officials from the Pentagon basically sharing articles from some of these publications, saying, "Look at this great article written by such and such publication." And then, I mean, members of the community are expecting these same publications to hold them account when it comes to possible illegalities. It's crazy. It really is. So, look, so some journalists are going to attack sources for claiming such things and saying that you should seek comment from the likes of Representative Turner. Well, look, I've been reporting on Representative Turner's involvement in possible in the UAP topic since he became vice chair of the Intel Committee, long before he became chair. And I even worked with the local newspaper in Dayton, Ohio, just trying to get some kind of comment on the record from him about the UAP topic. We failed. You know, we've sent multiple emails to Representative Turner's office, nothing. Even those who report within the halls of Congress who've asked him questions, they've got nothing. I think it's only News Nation, perhaps, that have actually managed to get some kind of comment from him, but otherwise he just avoids it. And obviously as well, I'd state that in terms of what he's put out before, I mean, with Representative Himes, who's the vice chair of the Intel Committee, they obviously tried to poo-poo the UAP topic on Fox News. And isn't it funny that he kind of like feigns bemusement and disinterest about the UAP topic? But I was told by multiple sources that he was going around like crazy last week, trying his best to get this language removed. So for someone who's apparently disinterested and bemused by the whole topic, I mean, it certainly isn't how it's presented behind the scenes, of him desperately running around the halls of Congress trying to get this language removed. It's corrupt, and there are so many people compromised. It's crazy, Matt. It really, really is.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. We were given this photo of, in case anyone has no idea what Mike Turner looks like, but we had this photo that was taken during the negotiation process during the NDAA, and here he is arguing with Schumer that we should. They should dump that legislation. Obviously, that's a joke there. But anyway, but our good friend from Uplifting Tweets makes these fantastic graphics. But yeah, seriously, Mike Turner, I mean, the guy is shady as hell. Clearly, in my view, pretty darn corrupt. There's any of these guys could have said, and this actually, I don't know why it didn't pop into my head until you were talking about it when I put the eminent domain clause, but all they would have had to have done, let's say that the sticking point was eminent domain. After all, these are Republicans, they're pro-business. I completely understand that aspect of it, but they could have just said, you know what, Chuck, knock yourself out with all this UAP stuff. Just get rid of the eminent domain clause. So Lockheed Martin is going to give me more cash, and you can go pass your legislation. But I think I answered my own question. It clearly wasn't just about the eminent domain clause. So yeah, and as many folks that have dealt with this in national security that have had the UAP topic part of their portfolio, and this was spoken about at the Seoul conference at the think tank at Stanford, there is no good national security reason why the general public cannot be told about their place in the universe. So I don't know. I think it's just a disappointment, and I would sense too that everyone in the UAP community was obviously very disappointed that this didn't come through. Now, JP, can you walk us through what was left in this legislation? We know they gutted the hell out of it, but was there anything good left other than more donations for Mike Turner's pockets?
Look, I'm trying to put a positive spin on this, but it is historic. It is historic. We have yet another third National Defense Authorization Act due to pass into law shortly. And we do have a records office that is now, held accountable to, in some respect, to preserve, to find out, and make available where possible, UAP records. But the real there's a bitterness. I mean, instead of having this fantastic, it had its issues, but to have this, highly democratic review panel of 9 with, eminent sociologists, economists, scientists, and all manner of other. I think there were 6 positions that, were meant to have gone in there. There was national security and foreign service and a professional historian. That was the other one. But now, instead of having this kind of high-powered, highly informed, highly educated, integral, independent board that were basically managing this with the approval of the President of the United States and the Senate and the House of Representatives and committees and so on and so forth. Now, this NARA, National Archives and Public Disclosure Office, now it's down to the originating agencies that are supposedly honestly producing these records and going about their business and as good public servants and so on. Right. These are the arbiters of what is to be found and what is to be submitted based on an old definition of UAP that does not capture what the Schumer Amendment did have in it. So there's lots of kind of wriggle room. And not only that, we've got this kind of hangover of the sort of JFK disclosure process that sort of panel and legislation that took place in, I think, in 1992. And you've got this automatic 25-year grace period of blackout on documents, which obviously doesn't help matters at all. So, we do have this records, National Archives and Records Administration, NARA, but it's down to the originating agency and the NARA archivist, which I'm sure makes all the difference, to be the operative parties that are determining whether or not to disclose or postpone disclosure. And that, of course, is also in this residual legislation subject to the original classification authority determining that national security interests do not outweigh the availability or the ability to disclose these records. So, I mean, it's just hurdle after hurdle after hurdle without this massive democratic injection and intellectual capital of the review panel that we had under the Schumer Amendment. And then we also have, this is the one piece of legislative text that I haven't actually been able to review, but it's basically a model of, the limitation of use of funds under Section 1687 from memory for certain unreported programs. And there is some legacy wording from what was originally, I believe, in the National Intelligence Authorization Act bill of 2024, but that bill kind of stalled. And I think that the Disclosure Act, the Schumer Amendment, took that wording, imported it into the Schumer Amendment bill. And then we have something that's not quite as effective and has as much bite. And from my understanding, within those that have seen the legislation, there are apparently loopholes that render these limitation of fund provisions ineffective with respect to company-funded or contractor-funded research and design. So, disappointing again. So, to sum up, the fact that we have, these definitions of unidentified anomalous phenomena, UAP, technology of unknown origin, and NHI, non-human intelligences that are explicit in this final bill, but the definitions are just not very helpful. In addition to this 25-year immediate protected period against disclosure of all work that relates to this, there is an issue with transparency, of course, despite the fact that it is historic because it's treating the establishment of a national archives on this subject matter. And so we have this definition issue, we've got the time delay issue of allowing this to come out, and then of course the review panel, which was the enforcement mechanism to allow the executive branch to continue bringing out and holding to account and subpoenaing, if necessary, witnesses and agencies to deliver up what was really there. So as I mentioned before, now we have something that can allow ambiguous cases or documents, records with say anomalous air trash cases coming through, and it's a real shame and a missed opportunity. So that's pretty much what has been left in. But when I look at how much effort and intelligence went into the drafting of this bill, notwithstanding the controversies around eminent domain, it's a shame. But we shouldn't be disheartened. I think we should expect this, and I think that society, and it's reflected in how we saw very little input from many of the Democrats on this. We need to earn,
which blew me away. I was so disappointed in that. I'm a Democrat, and I'm like, come on, guys.
I agree, and I think the president may or may not have been apprised of this and been involved, but maybe he politically, with the elections coming up, he just sat back, and in fact there was a deliberate standoff, although he was aware, something like that. And then you just really had, because there was a lack of resistance, you had this motivated group of Republicans that Chris has, adeptly outlined, just managed to railroad it. So it's that's where we're at. But there are things that can be done to, work towards a better future in transparency on what is one of, if not the biggest questions that we face as a species, as a race, as a group of people trying to progress.
Yeah, absolutely. And I really think, and I spoke about this in sort of a video op-ed that I did, that this really is a question of how healthy our democracy is. So the way this whole program has been managed, it's all been deputy level folks. So let's say theoretically, Deputy Secretary of Defense Kathleen Hicks. So for instance, she has the power. There's what's called the Special Access Program Oversight Committee. So for all the DoD SAPs, she is the chair. So she can, on her own, as a career bureaucrat, let's say, she can decide on her own what to tell the Gang of Eight about a particular special access program. So for instance, we'll just say the Air Force comes up and says, we need to create this SAP about this particular element of back engineering a non-human craft. Air Force goes to Deputy Secretary Hicks. She can decide that special access program is waived. And then all she has to legally do, from my understanding, and maybe this is tweaked a little bit now with this legislation, all she has to do with the Gang of Eight is say, I'm standing up this special access program. It's a Air Force support program. It's going to cost $20 billion a year. And that's it. That's all she has to tell them. And, and how that in and of itself, in my view, is undemocratic. How can 50-ish deputy level people that view our elected officials, be it Congress, executive branch, Secretary of Defense, can view all of these folks as temporary employees and decide amongst themselves that they do not need to know about a particular program or what goodies we have. And that is how this whole thing is gate kept. It's undemocratic. And as well, it would be, especially for the executive branch, because one of the things we were told is that some presidents have fully been read in, some were never read in, some were only read into a certain level of the program. So the President of the United States, who is the person that is our primary instrument or executor of foreign policy, how can he conduct foreign policy well on behalf of the United States if he doesn't have the whole sight picture? It would be like not telling the president that Russia exists. How can he make good decisions about our national defense if he's being kept in the dark? It's just insane. And Chris, maybe you can touch on this a little bit. Our article that we did with Josh Boswell in the Daily Mail detailing the CIA's Office of Global Access and their utilization of Joint Special Operations Command to recover crashed UAPs, UFOs. But there were many cases, how it was explained to us, that oftentimes that these recovery operations are given directly to a private contractor to conduct the entire securing of the site, recovery of the material, and it being brought back for their study. Is that not, again, an issue in terms of who is making that decision of what JSOC recovers versus private aerospace, and how do you know that decision is in the best interest of the American public when Congress isn't told about it, or the executive branch? What are your thoughts on that particular element? Do you think that applies to whether we have a functioning democracy if that kind of stuff is going on?
Absolutely, yes. And you have to ask yourself as well, what government resources are they actually using to find these landed or crashed craft in the first place? So there is this crossover. And when, from our understanding, when JSOC and the OGA do actually find these things, they try to get them off their hands as quick as possible to these contractors. And I would point to the revolving door as well that you've alluded to. So, look at Lloyd Austin, for instance. Well, he used to be a very, very senior part of Raytheon before he entered into the White House and the executive branch. And Raytheon has been one of the contractors that have been implicated in these kinds of things. So, who is he doing the bidding for? Is he doing the bidding for the American people that he's serving? Or is he doing the bidding for Raytheon, his friends back there? So this is the kind of tangled net that you're in now. Look at Hicks, for example. She was the one who established AOIMSG. Like I said before, you had Gillibrand who came up with her own amendment. And then all of a sudden, on Thanksgiving, it was kind of ambushed by this DoD announcement by Hicks and the Director of National Intelligence as well. So you have to ask yourself, what is really happening here? And also, we've reported of people who've gone from, look at O'Sullivan, for example, Stephanie O'Sullivan. She was within the CIA's Directorate of Science and Technology, which had an oversight over the Office of Global Access. And then she's then working for the ODNI, that is supposed to have oversight of intelligence agencies. Should there be kind of any legalities and whatnot? Okay, that's quite funny. And now she's at Patel, she's at the Aerospace Corporation. Come on, you've got so many compromised individuals here. If these allegations are all correct, it's and obviously I get the opinion, or I get the understanding that the president doesn't have any clear insight into what's happening. But I would add that, look, Schumer and Biden are in constant contact almost. I think Schumer said before in an interview that he's in touch with the president's chief of staff around about 4 times a day, and he speaks to the president about 3 times a week. So I find it very, very implausible to think, firstly, that Biden wouldn't have sanctioned that legislation in the first place, the draft legislation, with his name on it, without approval. And secondly, that Biden wouldn't be aware of the resistance that was occurring, that Schumer and Rounds were facing. So look, and as I said in my recent article, we've got this kind of narrative that Schumer came up with this language in respect to his, late great friend, Senator Reid, who obviously was an advocate for this topic. But also, you have to think that there is such a close relationship between the White House and Schumer. They rely on each other. Biden relies on Schumer to be his person within the Senate, trying to get things done in terms of his agenda. So you have this question. I don't know the answer, but it's a good question to ask. What was this UAPDA? Was it put up because it was part of some White House agenda, perhaps? I mean, I've heard from at least 3 sources now that this story that's been circulating around, that a very, very senior person from the US Navy had approached Jake Sullivan and basically said that the Air Force is lying to you when it comes to the UAP topic. And there are these secretive programs that exist. I mean, that first came out via Ross Coulter. I've since confirmed that to be accurate by from 3 sources, and I do know that person as well that allegedly told that information to, I believe, Jake Sullivan, and it is a very, very senior individual. So you ask yourself, well, okay, in terms of the context, what was it in terms of the February shootdowns and this alleged information coming to the White House, which perhaps led to this language coming through via Schumer? If that is the case, then you have to wonder, okay, if there is some kind of White House agenda to get this through, and it can't be proven, but as I said, it's a valid question to ask. If there is this agenda, what action would the White House, under this scenario, what kind of action does it take now? Does it just say, well, this is too dangerous to play around with, we've got an election coming up, we're just not going to touch this anymore? Or do they think, well, actually, this could be some kind of October surprise? Trump's polling very, very well right now. Why not just pull this out of the hat and just kind of like try to turn the tables? Trump is very, very conspiracy orientated. He goes on about the deep state and stuff. So if you can kind of like outflank him on this issue by bringing about transparency on UAP, I think that might be quite a smart move.
I agree. It would absolutely. I can't think of a better October surprise than Biden doing this. And again, I'm kind of keep emphasizing the whole democracy question here. I think one of the things, of course, for me anyway, that was disappointing is, so maybe in this language there are some restrictions on SAP funding, but at the end of the day, one of the things that we uncovered in the Daily Mail article is the CIA. Actually, let's back up a bit. So it's a subject I haven't really looked into quite a bit, but the Church Commission occurred when I'm guessing Congress found out that the CIA was up to quite a few things that were illegal, and it mandated that the CIA kind of clean up their act. Well, clearly what we found out is all the CIA does, they keep doing their same stuff. They just rearrange the furniture and to try and hide it. So in what we discovered on the Daily Mail article is that you have the CIA Office of Global Access, which, by the way, it looks like about a month ago, back in the end of October, when you and Josh and I were really cranking up on the research for this particular story, somebody removed all of the CIA Office of Global Access web links on the CIA website. So clearly the CIA was trying, and from what it appears to me, was trying to erase those tracks. But the larger question too is there is a lack of oversight for any potential criminal liability on the CIA's part. For instance, one of the things that we found out was that the CIA's Joint Special Operations Command, Office of Global Access, employs contractors that operate under non-official cover to do the dirty work. So by unofficial cover, it's a way of the CIA to employ a company or a private contractor to do things that they need to keep their hands washed of. So I would say that the physical retaliation against whistleblowers or people that were involved in the program, those operations would likely be conducted by private contractors operating under non-official cover for the CIA's Office of Global Access. Now, JP, we've heard people say, and I'm curious, as someone that is not in the United States, from a more global perspective, do you think that kind of activity, looking from the outside into the United States, is that kind of activity, the sort of dirty work and doing things that let's say theoretically could be illegal? Do you think that's just kind of how the real world works, that those sorts of things need to occur for a country to survive?
Well, it's ironic because, I mean, the States was obviously created from conflict with the British and with the help of the French in the 18th century with their navy. And, they fought for independence, obviously. And, it was built by the founding fathers, who were principled gentlemen that built a republic based on, freedoms and the right to pursue happiness and all these more noble notions, which as human beings we should be aspiring to. And something's gone wrong, and it's yes, money is just a tool. There's a lot of money and investment in this, obviously, but there's obviously an ethical problem. But I think it goes down to a more spiritual issue, and what we're dealing with are more intelligent, let's assume, NHIs, and this should be treated with white gloves. This should be done in interaction should be done respectfully, and in a manner that you would want to establish relations and ensure your own safety, but also, establish a kind of a dialogue. And what are we doing? What does the evidence or the leads suggest? That there are, acts of aggression being committed as against these NHIs who are, I would posit, not just they're not stupid. They're not just allowing themselves to be brought down for reasons of lack of technology or intelligence. I think they're operating from another point of consciousness, and we're not really understanding it. And maybe it comes down to something as simple as you have these private contractors or teams that we're putatively speculating about. Maybe these people are affected by this in some way. Does that have a ripple effect across people? I mean, this is what soldiers and contractors and engineers and scientists are. We're people, and there's a spiritual component to being a human being. And I think that maybe there is this misunderstood, unacknowledged, unknown ripple effect that's happening through these heinous misdeeds, which and humans are capable of terrible things. We say that we're inhumane, that the treatment is inhumane, but it's actually a very human thing to do, to bring suffering and aggressively approach others to preserve oneself or the ego particularly. And I just think that there's something that's gone wrong with the human condition to get to this point where, it's a bit like, advanced nations or societies introducing themselves to indigenous people, and often it went very wrong. And yet we are the inferior intelligence, and we are going out of our way to kind of benefit from technology, or think that we're trying to benefit from technological advancements and make profits and so on, have a national security edge against other nation states, but it's coming at this terrible cost potentially, and we don't know what the consequences of that will be if this is actually happening. And your leads and others are suggesting this kind of so-called X-Files scenario is really happening, and all we can do from the outside is just be rational and chip away at bringing forward information, and obviously just trying to create the conditions and democratically allow for those within the intelligence community and the military who really have had experience potentially with these types of activities to come forward. And obviously the ironic terminology that's being used is wild disclosure or uncontrolled disclosure, as if it's a bad negative thing. It's not ideal for sure. And I think that global society in the main is going to have a lot of adjusting to do. I don't know how difficult it will be, but what the Schumer amendment tried to do was to sort of release the pressure slowly in an idealistic and an intelligent democratic way, but it's failed. And then what's left is a vacuum, and we have this 2-year headwind between now and the next presidency, and it's going to be like a cold winter. And Chris really brought this out really nicely. And what do we do between now and then? What will the White House or the government representatives do? Will they say, well, we'll just lick our wounds and cut our losses until the next potential administration? Or, as you say, do we go in a bit harder and try and pull something out the bag? And I just think that whichever way you go, it looks bad for democracy. It looks bad for the United States, because what's sad is that something amazing, something revealing of the genius of nature and the cosmos and so on and so forth is just being sacrilege is being conducted, and it's happening at the sort of seat of modern democracy, where freedom and higher and more noble aspirations were born, and it's very sad.
It is very sad, and I think you really brought up some really good points in terms of the interactions that are reportedly taking place. And again, the oversight issue, or the democracy issue. So let's say that the allegations that we've heard from sources that, for instance, JSOC, Joint Special Operations Command, had a sort of group of operators that were, we'll just say, dealing with things like wet works and things like that. The level of criminality of what allegedly appears to be occurring out of the CIA with the Office of Global Access and a small element of JSOC. JSOC is the oversight for Navy SEALs and a lot of other people. So we definitely are not painting JSOC with a broad brush. Our understanding is that it was a very, very small section of people operating under non-official cover. But if it goes to a larger point, and Chris, would love to get your perspective on it, and JP as well, which I think you touched on a little bit. Let's say that David Grush's allegations regarding negotiations or agreements have been made with certain species. One thing that I think we have heard quite a bit is that it's not just one thing here that's interacting with us. It's many different things. That yin and yang, good and bad, is a universal truth. It's not just something that just is on planet Earth. It's everywhere in the universe. You have to ask yourself, if you have this group of rogue folks running out of CIA or DS&T that are making these decisions on behalf of not only Americans but the world population, and on their own, if they've indeed reached or made agreements with these species, how do you know that these agreements are in the best interest of not only Americans but just humans in general? Because here's the issue. If you are the CIA, Office of Global Access, or DS&T, or whatever subgroup or directorate is, let's say, engaging in these negotiations, how do they have, and can they ever have, complete intelligence penetration with this NHI? How do they know what this NHI is really up to, why it's here, what it wants? And these folks are making these decisions in an undemocratic way. I mean, Chris, I just don't see how anything could possibly come out of that is good with that current power structure and the hiding of things from our elected officials. What do you think about that, Chris? Do you think that that's a fair concern?
So democracy stems from two Greek words, demos, meaning people, and kratos, meaning rule. Currently in the US, you're having something which you could perhaps call lobbied kratos, or contractor kratos. So yeah, so it's crazy, and I reported as well that a number of sources had told me that the Holloman Air Force event, whereby some non-human intelligence had come off of a craft that landed at Holloman Air Force Base, that they had met with, they'd come out and they had met with US Air Force personnel. Give us that. If that is true, then that is huge. You have to ask yourself, okay, who did they meet with? What was discussed? Were any agreements made? What happened after that? What was the follow-up? Is that contact still kept? If so, where is it kept? Who has oversight of it? There's endless questions that could be asked now relating to these. And I'd also mention, we've spoken about the reference to UAP and the definitions. Look, maybe the secret holders in terms of this, they don't even refer to them as UAP. They might just refer to them as non-human craft because they know what they are. To them, they're not unidentified, So, this is it really, really is crazy. But yeah, you have to ask yourself about some of these events and what agreements may have been made. And also, yes, I from my understanding, and I think it's your understanding as well, that we are talking about a variety of origins. Some friendly, some some indifferent perhaps, and some maybe less friendly. And I definitely side with what JP is saying. We are not a good species. Like, if anything, we rationalize cruelty and suffering. We did this because we did this, and it's horrible. You go to a playground, you see like kids being bullied, and usually it's the kid that's got learning difficulties, that's vulnerable, and it's always the stronger kids who seem to bully these kids, in the playgrounds, and we like to think, well, these are just kids, these are just kids, and they grow up and then they become adults and they're fine then. But no, that's not the case, okay? All what happens is that they become more sophisticated and then they rationalize this kind of cruelty to other people. So I would argue that in terms of a lot of these organizations, you have groupthink that's occurring as well, in terms of why we're doing this and rationalizing their approach to this. And no one's really thought outside the box. It's at the moment, all the chatter is about, we've got lots of other warriors, we've got Russia, we've got Hamas, we've got China, we've got lots of global things. It's kind of like, step out of your box for a moment. We've been fighting as a species for thousands of years now, endless cycles of war. But now, our slightly more evolved monkeys that are prone to acts of violence now have nuclear weapons, and we're going to continue ratcheting up this rhetoric when it comes to China, Hamas, Russia, or whoever, what enemy comes next, because there'll always be a new enemy. So it's kind of like, do we carry on the way that we're going and face like oblivion and destroying ourselves? Or do we just take a step out of the box, say, look, let's play a card that we've never played before and say, look, we do know this outside entity. Maybe this is something that we could work together around. We don't all agree with each other, but let's just work with each other on this one thing. I like to, if you've ever seen an episode of Star Trek, and you've got the Federation, and they, they're very, very involved, ethics, morality, technology, cohesion, and they visit some planet that's not kind of like evolved yet, and it's kind of like one side saying, oh, this other side's really bad, they need to be destroyed, I hate them, we're going to war with them. And it's kind of like, when you're watching that as a viewer, you're just thinking how silly all these disagreements are when it comes to the broader scale of things, from the Federation's perspective as being these kind of outside entities, and you think, well, these people are just arguing with each other endlessly. If they could somehow kind of get themselves together and unify, they could perhaps have a chance. And I feel we're now perhaps reaching this point whereby we somehow unify at least around this topic, or we just continue into this escalatory process that could lead to nuclear disaster. So it's time to step outside this box. It's time to step outside groupthink. I know all these guys have grown up within intelligence agencies and private contractors. They've gone through all these processes and they're entwined with the culture and stuff. But it's time to wake up. Really, it really is. We need to step outside the box and think what's for the best of humankind, not just your shareholders.
JP, do you think that, touching on what Chris just spoke about, that the it's like, what's the mythical Greek creature where you chop one arm off, it grows back, tetrahedron, or what is it?
Is it the Medusa? The Medusa
Yeah,
with the
the Medusa. Yeah.
Yeah.
Clearly, I didn't do too well in school. I'm not the sharpest tool in the shed. But one question I have asked, and I'm curious, JP, your thoughts on this. If you have all of these people, let's just say like Ronald Moultrie, who guarantee you knows a lot, and oh, and by the way, they scrubbed his connections to Battelle Memorial Institute. That dude, he was on the advisory board of Battelle, which has been involved in all of this back engineering of materials, and he had it on his LinkedIn for a long time. I guess he got smart, removed that, but then the references to Ronald Moultrie, who is he's head of OUSD, Office of Undersecretary of Defense for Intelligence and Security. The agency, as Lou Elizondo has pointed out many times, engaged in a lot of the criminal retaliatory behavior. Moultrie obviously called his buddies at NSA and had that scrubbed off the internet as well, just like the CIA scrubbing Office of Global Access.
We've got the screenshots. I can show you the screenshots from LinkedIn.
Next time we'll do that. So you have folks like Ronald Moultrie or Kathleen Hicks or Douglas Wolfe, who was one of the original founders or involved in the founding of the Office of Global Access. All of these folks either were career military or career defense contractors that have now become lifers and are now part of senior executive service. Are the connections so deep, so corrupt, and so intertwined? JP, do you think that there is any hope of this being unraveled in a controlled disclosure, or because of this Medusa of stuff and these long connections and one of the things that was shared by an intel source is part of the motivation to keep people quiet that manage the program are guaranteeing that they'll have a nice job at Oak Ridge National Laboratory once they're out, or being head of OUSD INS. There are financial incentives. And of course, everybody's always wanting to worry about their retirement, take care of the family and those things. And those aren't bad things to worry about. But do you think that the intertwining of all of these special interests and secrecy and sort of fetishizing of this whole thing, JP, do you think that really the only realistic way to do this would be an uncontrolled disclosure? Or do you think a controlled disclosure would eventually happen if we give it some time?
Yeah, I think that both are possible, obviously, but we just need to remind ourselves there's a third party here. There's an X factor at play, and maybe we're actually quite manipulable, and there's an interaction happening at a certain level within government. Maybe there's something happening at the contractor level too. Because something has to give. And if there is this so-called catastrophic disclosure, which is a very kind of dramatic term, if that's the only way to get this out to the public, we have to ask ourselves, is it justified? Are we as a species entitled as from our birthright to learn about the greater nature of the universe or the multiverse? When we look at the testimony of Dave Grush, when we look at all the different research that's come into this and released FBI and other files, it talks about these other dimensional planes or spaces or realities from which they may be coming. And so there are inhabitants within perhaps this universe and other universes or worlds. And we need to know what is our place within this existence, within this reality or realities. And how can we evolve and transform into something more, something better, more efficient as a global society? And when leadership is failing an entire planet. And unfortunately, it rests on the shoulders of the US at the moment. But I think that the other major superpowers and countries are secretly very interested in this and trying to tap the data. It's not hard to understand or even unreasonable to expect that there is going to be something like this. Which is the crime against humanity? Catastrophic disclosure, or withholding a sensible process of truth and reconciliation for selfish and undemocratic interests? We have to ask these fundamental questions, and we have to understand that for every action there's an equal and opposite reaction. It's one of Newton's laws. So we can expect probably people to come forward eventually with information that tips the balance in the favor of truth, but at the expense of national security and the maintenance of social order potentially, and what is in the public interest. So I just think that everything is open game. What do I think can be done or can be done next? I think that we have to chip away. It's the small wins, the small kind of progress that adds to the larger picture. And I think the first one is maneuvering for a strong leadership at AARO, AARO at the DoD. I think that the leadership needs to have a genuine intention to afford fair and balanced information gathering and listening to people that come forward and acknowledging that they're real and that they're coming forward. And also with an accompanying will to disclose as much as is reasonably achievable, balanced against national security and the public interest. We have to do baby steps. It's a process. It's not an event. And I think there needs to be continued and increased US government and EU, European Union communications with expert nonprofits such as the Seoul Foundation, former defense and intelligence community professionals that are knowledgeable in the subject and landscape, that can actually bring credibility and inform, spread credible information that can be acted on rationally. I think another thing that can be done is increased engagement from the friendly nation states that are really probably very now aware that the US is having to, is shielding the cards so badly at the expense of their international relationships diplomatically, intelligence agency to agency. I'm sure this creates massive friction, and that there's tons of gameplay that's been played, for decades, but now it's really heating up because it's now in the public sphere as well. So I think that needs to be worked on. I think that there can be, increased engagement with influential legacy media. We always say, well, the legacy media has let us down, but they're going to have to get on board at some point if and when this becomes unstoppable. When you think of something like COVID, it dominated civil and society globally. That's all there was, and everyone was fixed to their sources of information, and these outlets aren't just going away. And thankfully there are these new very well organized media platforms, but that needs to be worked on too, and through these sort of non-profits, maybe creating the conditions for this increased ring fencing for the whistleblowers to come forward and give compliant testimony from within the intelligence community and the defense industries. It's a real shame that the Schumer amendment did not manage to carry forward the additional whistleblower protections, which were completely democratic, sensible, in the public interest, as well as national defense. So there has to be a workaround. We have to acknowledge and realize there's a real problem. We need to think around this differently because that opportunity has been taken away, and it's unacceptable to just do nothing anymore. There's too much progress that's been made, too much information coming forward. And I just don't think that, like King Canute at the waters of Bosham Harbour in West Sussex, where he tried, to show everybody that he could not turn the tide around. This is the situation that we're in. And then the final factor, which again, I touched on earlier, is that perhaps there will be a more overt display or interaction with these NHIs, because if we're in a game of some kind that's like an ecosystem of intelligences, including ourselves, who are less intelligent, who's to say that they're not exactly aware of how the playing field is appearing and who's doing what, And it may be that there is some kind of intervention that has to happen at some point, because we are literally in uncharted territory. This has never happened before in human history, and communication has never been so easy and connection so close. So there are all these different things that can be done, but we should never, ever, in my humble opinion, underestimate the fact that the object and the subject is and are non-human intelligences. And I think that there's only so much that we can actually do as people.
That's a very fair point. Chris, we're going to wrap it up here pretty soon. So if I were to want to get at, if I were in Congress and I were to hold a hearing, one of the things that I would suggest to these senators or congressmen, and I think this would all have to happen in a classified setting, I would subpoena Douglas Wolfe, or any of the folks that were involved in the origination and creation of the Office of Global Access. I would subpoena them, find out exactly what operations off the books or on the books were executed. I would probably subpoena the head of JSOC at that same time period and ask what private contractors were hired under non-official cover to deal with operations related to crash retrieval recovery operations. I would subpoena probably the head of the Air Force, he's a director, I'm blanking on his name, and ask for any historical data from the Talon Thresher platform regarding anything that would have been used to sense any particular UAP activity, historical data that sits within Talon Thresher. I think that they would be surprised at probably what they would find. And then also I would subpoena heads of DS, the Directorate of Science and Technology under the CIA. Not being a government expert, which I am not, how could a hearing like that happen? Could someone like Senator Gillibrand call for it, or Republican Luna or Burchett? Could that even happen at this stage? Bring these people in, put them under oath, force them to testify about these things that we have been hearing from multiple sources. Is that even on the table, or is that a pipe dream?
Depends if they want to do their jobs or not, doesn't it? So the Senate Intel Committee actually originated from the Church Committee, and investigating those same intelligence abuses, was the Pike Committee, which led to the House Intel Committee. And it just seems to me now that those committees, definitely in the House's case, may be compromised to some extent, that what they were set up to do has completely failed. Their mission has failed. Take away UAP from this topic and non-human intelligences. What we're reporting here are major intelligence abuses without any oversight. There's a runaway kind of like deep state here aspect to it that has no oversight, any democratic oversight. And it looks like some of the members have been brought off and do not want to do their jobs, basically, and they're not serving the people. So at the moment, you have this runaway system, which has completely failed. So let's just see if they do their jobs. There are some people within the Director of Science and Technology, such as Dawn Merricks, for example, who formerly served there. Her name's been brought up a few times. What does she know? You have to start asking these pointed questions now. I would call up witnesses who've been part of these apparent retrieval missions, so former members of special operations units, former members of the Office of Global Access as well. Let's call them all in, ask them what they know, and then let's ask leadership what they know as well. What happened with this retrieval? This happened on this date. Okay, what was catalogued? What was this material? Where did it come from? We need to ask these clear questions and get a timeline and get direct answers to this. How did you track this object that went down? How was it tracked? Okay, who organized the operation? Where did the operation take place? What was found? Did you have a best estimate of where it came from? What who was involved? Was it the 24th Tactical Squadron, for instance, in the US Air Force? Was it some kind of Delta Force unit? So what units were involved? Okay, and then where did the material go? Where did the material go? Where did you take it to? Who did you notify when you undertook this mission? When it went to the final customer, be it a contractor or whoever, what was determined from that contractor in terms of origination? Was it assessed to be something from some foreign nation? Was it originating from this earth, or was it not? What are the results? Where did it go to? How can we find this material? So we really, really need to audit this. What is the trail here? These are very, very simple questions to ask, and they should be asked. You need to audit every mission now from the Office of Global Access, in my opinion, and then follow the paper trail. Where does it lead to?
JP, in your opinion, if a hearing of this nature were to occur, would you, and you were advising Congress on how to set up this meeting from a legal perspective, do you think it would be important to put these folks under oath? Because one of the things that I understand is deputy secretaries, people that are very high up, Sean Kirkpatrick on Arrow, they're not put under oath out of a sort of respect for their position and that they can be trusted. Do you think that would be necessary to get to the bottom of this, to put these folks under oath when if they were to be called in to testify?
Gosh, it depends how much pressure is brought to bear on them as well. I mean, who's to say that there's some, serious kind of threats that are potentially occurring in the background, and whether or not you put them under oath, maybe they're going to say what it is that they need to say in order to save their skin, or this could be quite extreme. Right. Exactly. And they're people, and it's terrible, this whole situation, because it's very low consciousness. It's very it feels unnecessary. Yeah, and these are all human. These are societal notions that we kind of look to, but it's wasteful. It's abject in all the higher aspects of being human beings, and the way that we look at our families and so on. But when it comes to having to defend secrecy and these terrible activities, for me, and Ross Coulthart brought this up a long time ago, and I completely subscribe to this. You need to have truth and reconciliation commissions, and I think that it's right to persist with amnesty type provisions, because there has to be this compromise. Otherwise, we can't advance with the value system that that we're applying. But like Chris says, we need to come out of the box, and unless we compromise and forgive to an extent, I just don't see progress being possible absent this sort of X factor somehow pushing things forward through a demonstration, through some other unknown means that we can't predict. So for me, the oath is really not as important as we'd like to perhaps think. In terms of normal, that's what's normal, democratic business, sure. But this is so unique and needs to be handled very, very differently. And I often think of Nelson Mandela. This time last year, I was in South Africa, and I visited his cell on Robben Island, just off the coast of Cape Town. And the conditions that he and his colleagues were put in were horrific. Yet when he came out, he was a spiritual master, and he forgave and he moved on. I mean, South Africa now is in a lot of trouble, and it's kind of standards have dropped in terms of the sort of spiritual, philosophical impetus behind the current government and leaders. So, we need to elevate this level of thinking to truth and reconciliation, and it needs to be, substantial, I think, in order to coordinate a genuine, let's say, man-made progress to truth and to justice.
Chris, do you think, and I promise we're wrapping this up here soon, touching on JP's point, and I think it is important to get people out of the shadows. Do you think that there should be amnesty? I know, Chris, in our work with Josh on our article, some of the things that were done by this sort of rogue element of JSOC in terms of, we'll just say, physical retaliation and things that have happened historically to people that affected whether they're on the earth or not. Do you think that those people should have amnesty?
It's you have to, brother. You have to. What's the other option? You know, here I am going on about, you know, human species being a confrontational species, fighting all the time, and this is escalating now whereby we've got nuclear weapons, and if we carry on this course, we're doomed for destruction, basically. And I think we need to look at ourselves in the mirror as well in terms of what we do on social media. You know, I can't say peace and love to everyone. What are you doing to carry war against this person?
Why not? Should.
What are you doing? You know, what is Russia doing to carry war in Ukraine? What about the US? Why are you declaring war in this country? Why are you killing these people? Why are you starting confrontations? And then me on social media being like, I hate you, I'm coming after you, and stuff like that. You know, like I think you know, it all starts at home, and it has everything to do from an individual level and taking responsibility and actually kind of like saying that I can do better. And like I said before, groupthink is a really, really important part of this. You know, we look during the COVID pandemic and we look at our own cabinet in the UK in politics, for example. They've all been to Oxbridge, like 95% of them or something like that have been to Oxbridge, you know. They all know each other. It's groupthink. They've all been to the same kind of schools, you know, and I think you really, really need someone who's very, very different to break that cycle, like a Nelson Mandela figure, you know, someone who's actually gone for extreme strife and suffering to get to an enlightened kind of state and kind of like move things to a different perspective. And I think that's what we need to really, really, you know, what we really, really need to go for. But as I said, it all starts from home, and we can all improve in many ways as well, including myself.
Same here. I know I've really given the debunkers hell, and maybe some of it was justified, but I've made a decision. I'm going to let that go and try and lead by example rather than well, you know, but we're all human. We all have these sorts of things. This has really been great. JP, Chris, you've been a friend of the show for a very long time. You've been on here several times, and we always love having you here. JP, how can folks find you? This has been such a pleasure having you on the show.
Oh, thank you, Matt. Yeah, likewise. I've been a great admirer of the work and commentary that you've been doing. So, look, I mean, I have no kind of agenda. I'm not sort of making money from this. I have a Twitter account that you've posted. I'm on Facebook, and I publish now and then. And in fact, I'm looking to publish an article shortly on the kind of legal path and historic fingerprint that we've just seen over the last 2 years, literally the last 2 years to the month. And so, you know, I'm around, and I'm happy to respond to people's questions and all the rest of it. But, you know, like you guys, we're kind of committing a lot of time and energy to this because there's an importance, there's a personal aspect. I have experienced phenomena here in Mauritius and in Europe and elsewhere. So I know it's real. There's no question. It's more about why and what is the meaning of this. And you know, when we see everything that's coming out of the States, you know, I think it has global implications. It's not just a US issue. Everything is indirectly kind of hinged on to what the US does at the moment. So anyway, I'm around. I'm on social media, and yeah, that's me.
Chris, how about yourself? I know where to find you, but anyone that doesn't track what you do, where can folks find you and your work?
Yeah. I'm in the nightmares of everyone who works for the Office of Global Access. That's where you can find me. At the
Same
moment.
here. They hate me. See, I guarantee you the CIA is not a fan of what I'm doing right now.
No, jokes aside, it's Twitter. The handle is Chris UK Sharp, and you can find my website www.liberationtimes.com. And it's been such a pleasure appearing with both of you. It's you're two wonderful friends, and just thank you for all your support behind the scenes with helping with what I do. So thank you both. It's been such a pleasure.
Yeah, and very much so. I really appreciate you guys coming on. And I just want to end this particularly for you, Chris. I've noticed of late there are a lot of people, sort of legacy journalists, that have taken pot shots at your work, and some people that are, we'll just say, lobbyists. And I would just say that, in my view, it's all out of jealousy and jealousy of your work, jealousy of your connections. It's sort of sour grapes, because you Ross Coulthart, Mark von Rennenkampf, are really doing great work on this topic. And as you touched on earlier, these other folks in the debrief as well, they've done great work as well. But the rest of them, it's sour grapes. Don't let it bring you down. You're doing great work. So keep on doing what you're doing, and you do you. That's what I would say. Guys, thanks for joining us. So I just want to say, and this, I'm not reading off of a prompter or anything like that. I know that there are a lot of staffers in DC that watch our show, and perhaps some elected officials. I certainly hope so. I would just say to all of you, we elect you guys to represent us, to represent the will of the people. It's government by the people for the people, not government by defense contractors for defense contractors. And we entrust all of you that work in DC, whether you're a Republican or Democrat, it's not even really about the party, to work in the best interest of the American public. And our republic depends on proper oversight. And when you have the CIA running a program that is run in a way to avoid all of you understanding everything that they're up to, and you're not being given the whole picture from the CIA, the Air Force in particular, and others. So how can you make good decisions on the behalf of the American people, on behalf of our country, if things are being hidden from you illegally? It's not sustainable for our republic or for any democracy. So I would say to you, ask these questions, bring these people in. Don't let the Mike Turners of the world decide for all of you. And there are many of you that are in office for service to the public. You've got to bring those people in. You can't let them run the show. You can't let the Mike Turners of the world you can't have the Mike Turners of the world, the minority, make these decisions for you and decide what is covered or what should be spoken about or not. That's not the way our form of government is supposed to operate. I had a conversation with someone recently who felt that the article that myself, Chris Sharp, and Josh Boswell in the Daily Mail, Endangered National Security, this particular person felt that this sort of news is not something that the public can handle. And I'm sure there are many of you in Washington that do feel that this is something that the American people cannot handle. It's better to just keep it in the bag, not let the cat out. But I would say to you that the population in general is much more resilient than you think. Yeah, we had some weird stuff happen with toilet paper hoarding and all of that, but as former Assistant Undersecretary of Defense Christopher Mellon pointed out, Americans every day that live in major cities operate just fine under the fear of being targeted by thermonuclear weapons from nation states, Russia, China. You think about 9/11 and the threat vector that was put out that major cities were targets of dirty bombs. No one lost their cool over that. The nation persevered, although maybe we're a little bit more damaged for it following COVID. But I would just say that the American people can handle this. And at the end of the day, the most important thing is for our republic to survive. And it cannot survive when you have elements of the government, particularly the CIA, that are doing things that are illegal and are avoiding you providing proper oversight or hiding things from the executive branch. This democracy should not be based on 50 SESs that are deciding all of this for you and for us. This is not what America is. So I would encourage you to don't let this defeat discourage you. Don't look at it from a perspective of you've spent your political capital. It's the right thing to do for Americans and the public. Anyway, folks, if you enjoyed our show, we always appreciate a thumbs up, a subscribe, all of that good stuff. All of that, believe it or not, helps the algorithms and all of these platforms promote our content organically to people that do not track this subject. And the only way that we are going to see a sea change in this politically is if people rise up and demand from their elected representatives that they do represent and execute on the will of the American people. Anyway, thanks again for watching. Probably middle of January, we'll be back into our normal set and have a little bit better production value, but we really appreciate everyone's support and we'll see you soon.